I was reaching for my reading glasses on the nightstand when my foot caught the edge of the rug, and then I was falling, and then I was on the floor, and the pain that shot through my left hip was the kind of pain that makes you go completely still, because moving even an inch feels like it might kill you. I lay there for a moment thinking, you've really done it now. Except my name isn't Loretta. My name is June, and I had just turned 63 years old, and I lived alone in the house I'd spent 22 years raising my daughter in, and I was on the bathroom floor at 6:40 in the morning with no way to reach the phone I'd left charging in the kitchen. I tried to pull myself up twice. The second time I screamed out loud, which I'm not ashamed of, and then I just stopped trying. I pressed my cheek against the cold tile and I focused on breathing. That's all. Just breathing. I don't know how long I was there before I managed to drag myself, inch by inch, to the doorframe. Maybe 40 minutes, maybe more. Time does something strange when you're in that much pain. It stretches and folds over itself and stops meaning anything at all. I got to my phone. I called 911. And while I was on the line with the dispatcher, while I was trying to describe my address through clenched teeth, some small, embarrassing part of me thought, my daughter is going to feel terrible about this. She's going to drop everything and come. I want you to hold on to that thought, because I held on to it for a very long time. My daughter's name is Becca. She's 37. She lives 40 minutes away in a nice suburb with her husband, whose name is Todd, and their 2 kids, and a house they bought 3 years ago with a significant down payment that I provided. I want to be clear about that, not because I want credit for it, but because it becomes relevant later. Very relevant. Becca and I have always had what I would describe as a complicated relationship, though for most of her life I didn't use that word. I called it close. I called us close. She called me every Sunday, at least until she didn't, and I chalked up the gaps to busyness, to the kids, to the general chaos of a young family. I told myself that's what mothers do. They adjust, they accommodate, they wait. Her father left when she was 9. I worked 2 jobs for 4 years to keep us in that house, to keep her in her school, to keep her life as unchanged as I could manage. I'm not saying this to be a martyr. I'm saying it because I want you to understand what I built my identity around for 30 years. Being the kind of mother who showed up, no matter what. The ambulance came. The ER doctor confirmed what I already suspected, a fractured hip. Not the worst kind, she told me, which I found to be a very specific and unhelpful form of comfort. I was going to need surgery. I was going to need it soon. The nurse asked me for an emergency contact. I gave her Becca's name and number without hesitating. Of course I did. Who else would I give? I signed the consent forms. They wheeled me toward the OR. The last coherent thought I had before the anesthesia hit was, did they reach her? Nobody answered that question for me. I went under not knowing. I came out of surgery at 2:17 in the afternoon, according to the clock on the wall, which was the first thing I focused on when I could focus on anything. My mouth was dry. My leg felt like it belonged to someone else. A nurse named Delia was adjusting something near my IV, and she smiled at me when she saw my eyes open. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Did my daughter come?" I asked. Delia's smile did something small and careful. "We've been trying to reach her," she said. "The number you gave us." "How many times?" I asked. I don't know why that was my first question. Maybe some part of me already knew I needed to know the number. Delia checked her notes. "The charge nurse made the first call before you went into surgery, and then several more while you were in the OR. She paused. "I believe we've called 17 times total. 17 times. I closed my eyes. I told myself there was an explanation. Car accident, dead phone. She was somewhere without service, some pocket of the suburbs where the signal drops out. I had been that person. I knew what it was like to miss calls. I told myself that for 2 days. On the morning of my 3rd day in the hospital, my roommate's daughter arrived with a bag of food from the Greek place on 5th and enough noise to fill the whole room. I watched them from behind the curtain that divided us. The daughter was maybe 35, ordinary looking, not particularly attentive. She forgot her mother's favorite yogurt. She argued on the phone with someone for 10 minutes about something work-related. She wasn't, by any objective measure, exceptional. But she was there. I lay on my side of the curtain and I stared at the water stain on the ceiling tile and I thought about the 17 calls. Then 18. Then, by the afternoon, the charge nurse told me they were up to 22. I asked her to stop calling. She looked at me with a very practiced kind of gentleness and said, "Honey, is there anyone else we can contact?" I thought about that question for longer than it should have taken. I came up with the name of my neighbor, a woman named Agnes who is 71 and waters my plants when I travel. She shouldn't have been the answer, but she was. Agnes came that same evening with a small pot of chicken soup and her reading glasses pushed up on her head, and she held my hand and didn't say anything about Becca for almost an hour, which was the kindest thing anyone could have done for me in that moment. Finally, she said, "Have you heard from her?" "No," I said. Agnes pressed her lips together. She didn't say anything else. I heard from my daughter on day 4. Not a call, a text. "Hey, Mom. Saw I had some missed calls from an unknown number. Everything okay?" I stared at that message for a long time. 29 missed calls from the hospital over 4 days, and what she had communicated with that text, without meaning to, was that she had seen the calls. She had seen them coming in, and she had waited 4 days to check on me. I typed back, "I had surgery. I've been in the hospital since Monday morning." The 3 dots appeared immediately. Then, "Oh my God, Mom. Are you okay? Why didn't you call me?" Why didn't I call her? As if I had been sitting at home with my feet up, debating whether to reach out. I put the phone face down on the blanket. I didn't respond for a while. I needed to decide what kind of person I was going to be about this, and I didn't want to make that decision in a hospital bed while I was still on pain medication. But I'll tell you what I did do. I opened her Instagram page. I hadn't looked at it in a few months because I'd gotten tired of feeling like an outsider to my own daughter's life through a screen. But I looked now. The most recent post was from Monday evening, time-stamped 6:47 p.m., about 12 hours after I'd gone into surgery. It was a photo of her and Todd at some kind of rooftop bar. String lights, cocktails, the city skyline behind them. She was laughing at something off camera. She looked beautiful and completely at ease. The caption said, "Finally a night just for us. No schedules, no obligations, just present, no obligations." I put my phone down and I looked at the ceiling and I didn't cry. I want to tell you I cried, but I didn't. I felt something go very quiet inside me instead, the way a room goes quiet when you turn off a sound you didn't realize you'd been hearing for years. She had seen the calls. She had decided not to answer, and then she had gone to a rooftop bar and posted about having no obligations. I was the obligation. She came on day 5. Todd drove her. He waited in the car, which I only know because she mentioned it, quickly, as though it was a detail I wouldn't notice. She brought flowers from the hospital gift shop, the pre-wrapped kind with the little plastic picks that hold the bow in place. She sat in the chair beside my bed and she said all the right things. She was been overwhelmed. The kids had both had colds. She didn't recognize the number. I listened to all of it. I didn't interrupt her. Then I said, "The hospital called you 29 times, Becca." She opened her mouth. 29, I said again. "Over 4 days. Mom, I didn't." "You saw the calls," I said. "You told me so yourself. You said you saw the missed calls from an unknown number. You had 29 missed calls from the same number over 4 days, and you waited to check on me." She did the thing she's always done when she's been caught, which is to reframe the situation so that she's the one who's been wronged. She said I was attacking her. She said she couldn't be expected to answer every unknown number. She said I should have set up a life alert if I was worried about falling, which I found remarkable because it implied that this was a foreseeable event I had failed to prepare for. I let her talk. I didn't fight her on any of it. When she was done, I said, "I've been doing a lot of thinking the last few days." "Mom, I needed you to let me finish. I hadn't planned to say any of this yet. I was still in a hospital bed. My hip still had staples in it. But I was also 63 years old, and I had spent 34 years making myself small enough to fit around the edges of other people's comfort, and I had run out of patience for it with a speed that surprised even me. To my finances. Plans. To my plans, I think it's times. She looked at me. Something shifted in her face. What kind of changes? I'm going to talk to my attorney, I said. There are some documents I've had in place for a long time that I think need to be revisited. Her voice was very careful when she spoke next. Are you talking about your will? I'm talking about everything, I said. She stayed for another 20 minutes. By the time she left, the flowers were still in her hands. She forgot to leave them. Agnes picked me up when I was discharged. She drove me home in her Honda, carried my bag inside, and made me tea. She didn't ask about Becca again. She didn't need to. I spent the first week home in the rented hospital bed the occupational therapist had arranged, with a walker beside me and a rigid schedule of physical therapy exercises that I did without fail every single morning, because I have never in my life been someone who didn't do the thing that needed to be done. I had time to think. More time than I'd had in years, probably. I thought about the down payment. $240,000. I had given it to Becca and Todd 3 years ago, without conditions, because that's not how I was raised to give things, and because I loved her and I wanted to help, and I genuinely believed, that the relationship we had was worth that kind of investment. I thought about the Sunday calls that had stopped, about the birthday dinner 2 years ago where they arrived 40 minutes late and Todd spent most of it on his phone, and nobody seemed to notice or care that I'd spent 6 hours cooking. About the Christmas before last where I'd driven to their house and brought gifts for everyone and left with a candle and a card that Becca had clearly filled out in the parking lot because the ink was still slightly smeared. I had been cataloging these things for years, I realized, filing them away in some internal drawer labeled Adjust and Accommodate, and I had never once opened that drawer and looked at what was inside. I opened it now. I had nothing but time. I called my attorney on a Thursday morning 3 weeks after I got home. His name is a name I'll keep to myself, because what matters isn't who he is but what he told me, which is that yes, I could absolutely restructure my estate plan, and yes, it was entirely within my rights to do so. And no, it wasn't something I needed anyone's permission for. I spent 2 hours on the phone with him going through everything. My will, my beneficiary designations, the title on my car, the investment accounts I'd been quietly building for 15 years, the ones Becca didn't know the full extent of, because I'd learned a long time ago not to advertise what you have. By the end of that call, I had made appointments to sign the new documents the following week. I also called a real estate agent. Not to sell the house. Not yet, not necessarily, but to understand what it was worth now compared to when I'd bought it. The answer was a number that made me sit down, and not because it was small. The call from Becca came on a Saturday, 5 weeks after I'd been discharged. I had just finished my exercises and I was making coffee, moving carefully around the kitchen the way I still had to, when my phone rang and her name came up on the screen. We'd texted a handful of times since the hospital. She'd offered to bring dinner once. I'd told her I was fine. She hadn't offered again, I answered. "Mom," she said, and her voice had that particular quality it gets when something has rattled her, slightly too controlled, like she's been practicing what to say. "I need to talk to you." "Okay," I said. Todd's mom ran into Barbara Holloway at church. She started, and I had to stop myself from making any sound, because Barbara Holloway is my next-door neighbor on the other side, and she talks, and apparently she'd mentioned something to someone at some point about the real estate agent who'd come to do the walkthrough. And she mentioned someone was looking at your house. "I had an appraisal done," I said. "Just to know where things stand. Are you selling?" Her voice cracked just slightly on that last word. "Mom, you can't sell your house. This is where you've lived for." "I can do whatever I'd like with my house," I said. "It's my house." Silence. "I've also made some changes to my estate planning documents," I said. "I thought you should know." More silence. Then, what does that mean? It means I've updated some things. It's something I should have done a few years ago, honestly. Mom. Her voice had changed. The control was gone. Mom, you can't do this because you're upset about the hospital. I explained what happened. I didn't know, Becca, I said. And I said it gently because I'm her mother and I will always be her mother, and that doesn't change. Not for any of this. I'm not doing anything to punish you. I want you to understand that. I'm making decisions about my own life and my own resources because I've spent a long time not doing that, and it's time that I did. This is because of the calls, she said. This is because of the 29 calls. The 29 calls are part of it, I said. But they're not all of it. She wanted to come over. I told her I wasn't ready for that. She called back twice that day, and I let both calls go to voicemail, and I played both messages, and in neither of them did she say I'm sorry, which I noticed the way you notice a chair that's been moved slightly from where it usually sits. You can't always say what's different. You just know something is. It has been 4 months now since I fell. I walk without the walker most days, though I still use it when I'm tired. My physical therapist says I'm ahead of schedule, which honestly I expected, because I am not a person who allows myself to fall behind schedule, even when I've literally fallen. I have made a lot of changes. Some of them are financial, some of them are quieter than that. I call Agnes on Tuesdays. Sometimes we walk the neighborhood together, slowly, and she tells me about her grandchildren, and I tell her about whatever I've been reading, and it's the most ordinary kind of friendship. And I have decided it is one of the most valuable things in my life. Sesta. I signed up for a watercolor class at the community center, which I mention because I had been meaning to do that for 6 years, and I kept putting it off for reasons I can no longer remember. There's a woman in the class named Flora who makes me laugh harder than I've laughed in years, and she's 70, and she drives herself everywhere, and she has opinions about everything, and I think she's magnificent. I had lunch with Becca once. About 6 weeks ago. We met at a place halfway between her house and mine, and we talked carefully around the edges of things, the way you do when you've both agreed, wordlessly, that you're going to rebuild something, but neither of you is entirely sure yet what the foundation is supposed to look like. She didn't ask about my will. I didn't bring up the calls. We ordered the same kind of salad, which has always been a thing we do, and I held on to that small sameness for a while afterward. I don't know what we are to each other right now. I know I love her. I know that doesn't stop. Not really, not even when you want it to be a little simpler than it is. But I also know that I had been making myself smaller for so long that I had confused smallness with love. I thought the shrinking was proof of how much I cared. I thought the accommodating, the waiting, the adjusting. I thought that was what devotion looked like. I know better now. I was on the bathroom floor for 40 minutes, alone, before I could get to a phone. And somewhere in those 40 minutes, between the pain and the cold tile and the sound of my own breathing, I made an unconscious decision that I've spent the last 4 months making conscious. I am not going to spend the time I have left making myself easy to overlook. I kept the rug, actually. I know that might sound strange. But I moved it away from the nightstand and I bought a grip pad to go under it, and now it sits in the middle of the room where it always looked like it belonged. And every morning when I put my feet on it, I think, you are still here. You are still here, and you have things to do. Not for anyone else. For you. That's the part I should have figured out a long time ago. I'm just grateful I figured it out at all.